Anin, Dominique Nindijnikaz, Peterborough, Nindonjaba. Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm from Peterborough, Ontario, and this is my story. To best understand it, we have to go back to here, in Maniwaki, Quebec, in the fall of 1917. My ancestors were Algonquin people living in the region, who would canoe down the river to a different, more suitable location in the winter. Usually, they did so early enough to avoid the winter weather, but that year, a cold front came in that made the river nearly impossible to navigate. They got stranded on a small island in the middle of the river, owned by a nearby farmer who had let them stay there many times previously. The farmer soon established a relationship where they would deliver food and other supplies to the island. One of the young women on the island, who was 17 at the time, fell in love with the farmer's son. She did not speak French, and he did not speak Algonquin, yet their love prevailed. When the spring came and the ice melted, she chose to stay behind to be with him rather than leave with the rest of her family. While their love was beautiful, it also came at a great sacrifice. She took the French name Belt, her true name now lost to history. She never saw most of her family or friends again, and she never spoke her language after leaving. For all her life, she always insisted to do everything herself, that she never needed a man to do anything for her. She would spend lots of time in the forest gathering medicines. She was the person everyone in the family went to if anyone was sick. No matter the illness, she had a solution. Her and her husband would go on to have 17 children, the oldest of which was Jean-Louis, my great-grandfather. In my family, we often say that Jean-Louis's blood was wild. From the time he could walk, he refused to be kept inside or confined to a city. When he was 25, he met the woman who would become his future wife. Little did they know they were polar opposites. She loved the nearby town, wanted nothing more than to be surrounded by the people and buildings. He yearned for the freedom of the country, to live in the forest in nothing more than a cabin and live off the land. He was a trapper, hunter, and fisher. Their entire relationship was a tug-of-war between city and country. They would move to a city, live there for a few years, move back to the country for a few years, then eventually move back to the city. Over the years, they had 7 children, including my grandmother, Nicole. My grandma takes after her father, and everyone knew it from the day that she was born. She was born with that same drive for freedom, to rebel against the system she was born in. She took after her father's love of fishing and hunting. Her dad entered her in a shooting competition when she was 12, despite everyone except her father protesting that it was improper for a girl to do so. She ended up not only competing, but winning the competition. That competition is indicative of my grandmother's entire relationship with her father. He taught her to never ever let someone tell her she can't do something because she was a woman. She began to join him in collecting wood. He taught her how to make cups out of birch bark and to know which water sources were safe to drink from. Her and her father would often go on fishing trips, where he would fish by spear and teach her how to do so too. He taught her how to hunt and butcher her own game. Everyone says that my grandma was born in the wrong time period, that she was too determined and headstrong for the time she grew up in. But personally, I think she was born into the wrong culture. Indigenous women were never meant to rely on men, to be doting housewives who waited for commands from their husbands. She was exactly who she was meant to be. She was just born into a culture that didn't know how to handle it. My grandma would later meet my grandpa, a man with Indigenous heritage who, like her and her father, loved nothing more than to be outdoors. They'd eventually get married and settle down, though, like her grandparents and ancestors, she never wanted to stay in the same spot for long. Now, at nearly 80, she has moved over 40 times in her life. They had 2 daughters together, one of them being my mom. My grandma was the one who introduced me to our Indigenous heritage. I remember playing cards with my grandma when she mentioned having been to an Indigenous event, and my brother made a comment that she didn't look like the people he saw in the cowboy movies, to which she responded, "Well, that's because I'm undercover." The joke has remained to this day, and it comes up almost every time we visit her in Quebec. But as I've grown, I've realized that the joke that I heard at 8 years old was actually a perfect metaphor for mine and my family's indigeneity. I, nor my family, look traditionally indigenous. The culture was mostly lost through the generations, the pressure to leave it behind unfortunately succeeding. I'm not considered indigenous enough to exist in indigenous spaces, but it feels wrong to ignore my indigenous heritage. If I ignore it, what happens to my ancestors' legacies? Are they forgotten, just yet another casualty of colonization? Belt's true name has been lost to history, as have many of the names of my other ancestors. Not due to time, but because their names, culture, and languages were systematically erased. They are the reason I exist. Do I not owe it to them at the very least to acknowledge that their blood runs through my veins? That is the turmoil that I, and countless others in my position, face every day. In every discussion about Indigenous people, about the nature of settler versus Indigenous, we don't know where we belong because we exist as both. Our very existence is an alliance between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, an alliance that no matter what can't be broken. At the beginning of this, I introduced myself in Anishinaabemowin, and though my pronunciation may be wrong, I dedicate each sound to those who came before me and those who will come after me. I hope I am able to make my ancestors proud, and by learning the language that was stolen from them, I can move forward with a piece of each and every one of them.